Hello and welcome to another Madaxeman.com Army List podcast. This week myself and the regular team of Dave and Richard follow up our continuing series of matched pairs armies, looking at the historical opponents, the Byzantines and the Bulgars, two of the principal protagonists in the Balkans and the whole area around Byzantium. And particularly this week we're looking at how a Bulgar list will be put together to take on Byzantines and how a Nikeforian Byzantine list will be put together to take on the Bulgars. We also, as usual, did a little bit of the history and then finally round things off by talking about what figures you can buy and which ones we recommend and suggest. So sit back and enjoy the podcast.
This means war.
Well, hello and welcome to another Madaxeman Army List podcast. I'm joined, as always, by Richard and Dave. Hello, everybody. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. All across northwest London and the home counties here, dialing in. So this week we're looking at an interesting period of history, an interesting region where there was historically there was a lot of history going on, and but it's also partly, I guess 50% of this podcast is part of our regular theme of slightly obscure armies, and 50% of it is very much one of the Rolls-Royce armies. So the conflict in history that we're looking at today is between the sometime allies but often foes, the Bulgars and the Byzantines, fighting in the Balkans, allied in the Balkans, bulwark against the Turks or the other steppe tribes or against the Rus and all sorts of different people. Lots of interesting history here. But the Bulgars being a list that is often overlooked for different purposes. So what we thought we'd do is look, both of these lists cover quite a long period of time as well. Obviously, there are multiple Byzantine lists, and the Bulgars don't get quite so much love from the list writer, unfortunately. But what we decided to do is kind of look at the sort of the tail end of the Bulgar list and take one of the Byzantine lists as a potential foe, and try and draw up three army lists for 3 lists for the Bulgars and 3 lists for the Byzantines, and try and see how many different ways there are of putting these armies together and using them, with sort of a nod to the idea that they might be fighting each other and doing that. But I think, as we always do normally, it's probably best to start with a bit of the history if we're looking at the Nikeforians and the tail end of the Bulgars. But I think the Bulgars are an interesting group with an interesting history and a number of different empires and serving a number of different functions in that region. But Dave, I guess your studies of Byzantine history, if we can dredge back in your brain that long to your student days, obviously only a couple of years, as you're now in your mid-20s, of course. Yeah. And tell us what you know about starting with the Bulgars and their wars against and allying periods with the Byzantines.
Well, I guess my knowledge is, as much as the three of us are, a bit of a rehash of Wikipedia, because I've done a bit of research back to remind myself after 30 years. So the Bulgars are a Turkish tribe beginning in the Caucasus, like all the Turkish tribes kind of do. In those mountains there, they sort of drift into Europe. As did the Huns, as did the Magyars, as did the Khazars, the other tribes. I think the interesting thing with the Bulgars is they seem to be a bit more of a mishmash of peoples than other ones. When they arrive into Bulgaria, they incorporate a lot of the more Slavic peoples and things like that into their society. And they gradually become what's known as an empire, in fact. They have 2 periods of empire. I think they arrive in Europe in the 7th century as a Hun-type horse archer army who are fighting against the Byzantines and gradually set themselves up. It's a period where there seems to be much more of a mosaic of society happening. I think, where in the past you've had the Roman Empire, the Sassanid Empire, you've now got a much more of a mishmash of principalities, kingdoms. The Russians are starting to appear as a power in their various princes. So you've got a period where you've got Russian principalities, kingdoms, then you've got a Bulgar kingdom, then you've got the Byzantines who are much reduced in their area, then you've got the Fatimids to the south, that sort of area. And then within that, you've got smaller, these can be sort of confederations with local warlords, particularly in the Byzantine state. You've gone through a period which in war games terms is the thematic, where the Byzantines have gone very much on the defensive, and their military system has become like local dukes, Duck says is in the Roman, and they're in charge of defending their own areas. And that's the same across the whole area to a large extent. You know, the Fatimids work on small warlords who gather together under one state, as do the Byzantines, as do the Bulgars.
So I guess that, you know, it's interesting looking at this Bulgar list. It starts off with textbook, you know, a dozen shooting cavalry. It's a horse archers steppe army when it starts. In fact, even it's got that difference in terrain. Before 680, it's got steppe as its terrain. From 680, it moves into plain and mountains and forest, and starts to add more different troops. There's you start very much as a horse archer army, which is kind of interesting. It gives you different ways of putting it together, but again, they do look like, again, from my extensive knowledge of Wikipedia, like a people in transition from moving from being a steppe tribe to being a much more, I don't know, town, city, feudal, quasi-feudal, principality-based thing. And then that brings them into the sphere of influence of the Byzantines over the years. And then sort of very much towards the tail end of it, you do get into that era that we're looking at against the classic Nikeforians, which in all war games rules has always been kind of the Rolls-Royce Byzantine list, hasn't it? You know, is that just because it's just got more toys, or you know, what makes the Nikeforian the one that everybody kind of gravitates to when you're looking at it? Because it's, in some ways, it's not wildly different to the thematic, and then some of the other sort of post Nikeforian Byzantine lists have got some of those elements, but then move a bit sort of knighty. I don't know, Richard, when you're looking at the Nikeforian list, what's kind of that magic ingredient that makes that so appealing to wargamers?
I think it's the evolution from sort of heavy swordsman to heavy spearman to mixed heavy spear bow, and so it becomes a much better army for driving off mounted enemies.
Bulgars, for example.
Bulgars and also various Islamic peoples, and so it becomes perhaps a bit less effective at dealing with heavy foot, but then it picks up the cataphracts as well, and or later on some knights, which just give you some other ability to have a go at heavy foot. So it is a bit of a Swiss Army knife. You can, depending who you're facing, you can make your choices appropriately. And that's always attractive to wargamers.
Yeah, I guess it is. And those cataphracts in that Nikeforian list, it's, you know, cataphracts are a troop type that has been and gone for, you know, the thick end of 1,000 years by the time they come back at this this list in a lot of places, you know, other than maybe in parts of, you know, China or the steppe over there, the Tibetans, but then suddenly they pop up back again in the 900s with the Nikeforian list. Is that, you know, are they a troop type that label of cataphracts has just been stuck on because they're not quite knights, or, you know, do they really function like cataphracts? Were they kind of a unique throwback for unique circumstances, those cataphractoi?
Well, my reading of it is no, that, you know, we've got a Roman state that has libraries that stretch back thousands of years, and, you know, they were still using cataphracts in the early 5th century, and they decided that they wanted more punch to take on some of the Arabic heavy infantry in particular, and so that they felt that up armoring them, and they basically used them as little hammers to break through the enemy line, with the tagmatic cavalry then flowing in behind and exploiting.
I think they were small units that were brought back in to do a principal job to bolster the cavalry particularly, and they were an elite unit. I think you remember if in Fog they were half cavalry, half cataphracts and half bow and blah, blah, blah. And I think in the old DBM eras, they were some sort of weird, incredibly...
Nice thing, possibly, yeah.
Exactly, you know.
Okay.
So rather than having lances, I think they have maces. So they're very much about slamming into the enemy and bopping them.
Yes.
Oh, right. Okay. No, so actually they were, the theory being, or well, maybe the fact being that they were people digging back in the annals and going, we used to do these a few hundred years ago.
Yeah.
Let's do that again and use them in penny packets. So if you've got actually then if you're fielding the two that you're allowed, the proper way to do it is actually to field them separately and mix them up with your infantry and try and
the cavalry historically, but
all right.
I think
okay.
we'll be doing them with the infantry, that's for sure.
Yeah, we put them in with infantry, and when we're putting these two lists together to fight against each other, it's kind of interesting thinking what those armies can be, because to my mind, you know, I don't know when designing the list. If I'm designing, which we'll look at in a while, the Bulgarian list, you know, the thing I'm most worried about in the Nikeforian list is probably those Skoutatoi, and how to deal with those kind of shooting, speary infantry blocks. Clearly, the heavy cavalry, the really good quality shooting bow heavy cavalry are worth worrying about. But it's just kind of how do you deal with the Skoutatoi, and I guess flipping it the other way around. What do the Nikeforians worry about in the Bulgar list, or is it? When you guys were putting those lists together? I
think if it's a two-list competition, which we sometimes do, I think there's two ways to go with Byzantines and go really heavy on the Skoutatoi mixed bow units. If you know you're going to be fighting a medium cavalry army, then you can put down as many Skoutatoi as you can and you shoot them off the table. But if you're fighting, you know, I think you end up, the standard Byzantine practice was to have a line of the cavalry doing the functioning fighting, and if they found themselves in an issue, they would retire behind a line of spearmen, bowmen, thus giving themselves a break. So where it's a sort of stepped warfare with lots of horse archers chasing each other backwards and forwards across low rolling hills, you know, if the Byzantines found themselves in trouble, they'd retreat behind the spearmen and, you know, and have a breather. We've got a lot of pamphlets on how these armies worked. You know, there's a lot of treatises on how these armies worked.
I think that whole concept of falling back behind the spearmen, you know, I'm doing inverted commas here thing on the Zoom call, is an interesting one, because when you know, maybe I'm kind of overstating it or overthinking it, but when you say it out loud, there's a concept of falling through the ranks or literally going behind a massive, great, you know, battlefield covering line of them. But certainly, Dave, if I think of that game that we played, I think it's the one that I put on YouTube as well. We both had relatively small blocks of 3 or 4 spearmen in our different Byzantine lists. I had a kind of hairy barbarian Byzantine list, and you had a more fiddly about Byzantine list. But both of us had blocks of heavy infantry that got pushed forwards, and even on the table, you know, the table's 30 bases wide and those blocks were 3 or 4 bases wide. They did provide a piece of terrain which actually the cavalry had to flow round and would find it difficult to kind of march past or just drive past and ignore. So I was actually surprised how well that worked as a theory. Certainly as your guys fell back, my army I think was all about charging forward anyway, so it wasn't doing much falling back unless it was.
And so I think it's interesting looking at the Bulgar list, where in the sort of 700s it's probably more mounted bow and medium foot, and then perhaps after contact with the Byzantines it's evolving to charging horse and heavy spear. So obviously quite a big shift in Bulgar doctrine happening in the middle of the 9th century.
Yeah, in response to the Byzantines. So the list sort of designs itself then to take on, the list evolves because of that actual general pressure. So that what makes this a really interesting mixed pair. They're both lists that are the evolution of fighting against each other, or learning from each other. They literally are. They have been rubbing up against each other for hundreds of years before they get to the point at the end of these lists. Then, okay, well, look, I think that sounds like a very good point at which to move on to having a look at some of the lists.
This means war.
So here we are with the list. What we're going to do is we're going to run through all three of our Bulgar lists first, and then run through the Nikeforian Byzantine. So if you're a Byzantinophile, we're going to keep you hanging on for a bit, but we'll try not to be too long. I'm sure that's what everybody's excited about, unless there's a lot of people out there with Bulgarian figures that they're desperate to use. So Richard, your Bulgar list here, you've gone 970, which is kind of that late-ish tail end of the Bulgar period, when they turn into heavier foot and charging cavalry. You've got an initiative of 2. I think the army only has a general count of 3, so getting much higher than 2. I suppose you can get up to 3 if you really work it. But this is in the plain, mountain, and forest period for terrain, and you've gone 26, which is going big, and with a 7, a 6, and a 13. The 13 obviously being the C&C and being brilliant, needs that to command 13. You've got an included ordinary, obviously one of your textbook unreliable, and an included competent as well. So run us through what these 3 commands are and where you'd put them and what you'd do with them.
So I had a quick look on Wikipedia and found some historical names and thought I would set it in just before the twilight of the Bulgar period begins. So we start off with Emperor Samuel, who was in charge about that period. And I've given him 5 heavy spearmen and 4 bowmen, so they can advance against the Byzantines. Hopefully I'd find a bit of brush or a field to have the bowmen in, probably on one edge. But the idea is that the bowmen are there together with the light infantry bow, the 2 of those in front of the spearmen, so that if they end up against Byzantine mounted, they can force them to retire. And if I end up in front of Byzantine mixed, the bowmen can hopefully shoot them up from rough while the spearmen go in and deal with them frontally. And then just a couple of horse archers, a medium and a light, to clear up and stop anybody nibbling around the flanks, with the medium perhaps having the idea that if the opportunity arose, they can pop out on somebody's flank.
Yeah, with that sort of 5 spearmen and 4 bowmen, that's twice as many as Dave's legal maximum and minimum. But that's suddenly a 9 wide sort of quasi scutator, isn't it? Really, but it's actually exactly. Those 5 spearmen can punch in and take down the scutator. So were you specifically then thinking, I'm fighting that sort of Byzantine army and this is how I evolve it, or is there a nod to this would work in period as well, in a sort of slightly broader competition, but obviously in date period?
I think it's actually a good pre-1000 list. I think against anybody except knights or even against elephants, a lot of the cavalry would dismount as armored, impetuous swordsmen. So I actually rather like this list. It's large, it's got quite a lot of capabilities, it's got reasonable command, it's got an unreliable Prince Boris, which seemed highly appropriate.
That seems good, yeah. So run us into these next 2 commands then, because they're broadly similar, but pretty punchy. So you've got a 7 and a 6 there.
I've got a 7 and a 6. So the smaller one is under Boris. That is 1 elite impetuous heavy cavalry with the general included, 2 other heavy impetuous 2 medium and a light bow, depending on the situation. Could be in the middle or could be on a flank. Really depends how the terrain drops out as to, I would think, well, where do I want command 3, which has the foot in it, and then the other 2 go where they can best support. The hope would be that that's basically just charging at the Byzantine mounted and trying to drive them off. But it's with the light bow, horse bow, if you're facing the Byzantine scutator, you leave the light cavalry bow behind to slow them down while everybody else just rides out of the way of the shooting. Command 1 then slightly larger. This is again an included elite general, but 2 other elites, 3 other mediums, and again a light cavalry bow. I've included the general again, and again, I think there's enough punch of these. You're hoping that in most times you're going to be up against, say, 4 of the double-armed Byzantines. And so while the medium cavalry impetuous aren't that great, if they're just providing an overlap, they're absolutely fine. And I'm hoping that they're having, 6 or 5 heavy cavalry, one of them can be made to maneuver a little bit out to the flank before contact. That'll all depend on the pit dice when the thing comes. But I think it's large. It's got quite a lot of armor, quite a lot of elite, some reasonable cohesion. Probably be quite hard to play on occasions if you roll too many 1s on command rolls. But that's true of most of these armies.
That's the joy. And actually, with 7 and 6 in those charging cavalry commands, with as you say, 6 charging cavalry and 5 charging cavalry in it, those, which is quite unusual, and this is quite unusual for some of the ways we put these together. Both of those are big enough to work on their own flank and stick the infantry down the middle.
Yes.
Or that infantry command could also sit on a flank with terrain, with the spearmen butting up against the terrain, the bowmen going into it, and a couple of horse.
Precisely.
And then you're putting 11 charging cavalry together, which I'm a big fan of as a concept. I think that works. Dave, what are you looking at? What do you see in this one?
Well, I think you stole the words out of my mouth there, because I'm looking at thinking 11 impetuous cavalry is one hell of a strike force. And you've got troops you can sacrifice. If the mediums go down, it's not going to threaten the whole army. I think that's really powerful. I would still worry about the flanks of those 2 divisions of the army, because being pulled around, particularly by Byzantine troops, that's the name of this game. When you're playing Bulgars against Byzantines, is can the Byzantines do their maneuvering, do their tactical stuff and slow that charge down? But that's going to be very, very difficult with that many charging cavalry.
Do you think there's on that question of defending the flanks and people maneuvering around it, 11 charging cavalry is lovely and wonderful and all the rest of it, but is there an argument for swapping out of each of those 2 commands, maybe one of the medium cavalry impetuous and swapping it in with a medium cavalry bowman, just so you've got something that's a bit more controllable? It would cost you 4 points. You'd lose a light infantry bow maybe or something, but would that be worth doing? But you'd lose two charging cavalry, but you'd suddenly get an extra group that maybe you couldn't command and control. I don't know.
The reason I didn't do that is because I've included the generals. And that's why I've put the medium cavalry bow with the C and C, because in an ideal table, one flank is pretty empty, and you've got all the mounted commands there, and they drift towards the edge of the table, and the heavy infantry move up protecting the flank. And then that's why the horse archers are in that large command, just to provide some of that cover and support. Because my experience is if I put extra troops in, but I include the general, he gets stuck in combat and they just get picked on.
Yes,
that's possible. Dave, what do you think?
I totally agree.
You're an instinctive fiddler.
Oh, sorry about that. I think one of the things Richard's done something sensible in the army. He's had the brilliant general. The brilliant general's not trying to control any impetuous troops. His job there is to tie down one side of the table probably and push it across. And he's got enough bowmen there. If he's got his medium cavalry and the light horse archer supporting the Bulgar foot bowmen, that can really tie down one of the wings. It's a Richard trick. He uses it with his Palmyrans. The Palmyrans. So you're sitting there thinking, how am I going to root out all this bow fire? And it can just take up so much time dealing with all that bow fire that you've missed the rest of the game.
Actually, yeah, that's an interesting thing to think about as well, because there's always that temptation in ADLG to go, I've got impetuous troops, so what I have to do is give them a competent or a brilliant general to give me the possibility to control them. And then you end up going, and then I'll give them something else, because sometimes I'm not going to spend all those pips. But your third command here with the 4 archers and the spearmen with the brilliant C&C, those extra pips from the brilliant C&C could be driving 2 or 3 bowmen to work with either of those charging commands. So the charging commands have got kind of slightly light on the command and control, but you're compromised. The fact that you can't hold them back, or might not be able to hold them back, the trade-off is it's a 26 strong army with 11 charging cavalry, and you gain that maneuverability through spinning a couple of bowmen off from the other command that possibly doesn't quite have enough to do with its pips, with its command and control.
Well, except that you're probably going to have 2 infantry groups and a mounted group. So most turns you're going to need 3 pips, which is why I've gone brilliant. If the turns where you have a 4, you can use the 2 mounted separately, or as you say, you can break the archers up. I mean, like all armies, it's got its vulnerabilities, but I really quite like this mix. As Dave says, it's a bit of a me-type army. So
very interesting. Very interesting.
You said, Tim, about including generals. If you've got impetuous cavalry, they are going to charge. There's no point in trying to sit there and go, I need to be able to control them. Don't work against what they are. Just accept what they are. Include your generals. Make the general ordinary. And if they charge off across the table, so be it. You just
honestly, I think both of you have played me in Tabletop Simulator, and will probably remember that's a lesson I've fully bought into. Possibly not through my own choice, but just my troops going off and doing it anyway. But sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So, okay, no, that's interesting. That's the first one done.
Means war.
So look, we're now into our second Bulgarian list, possibly only the second Bulgarian list ever pulled together in history, I suspect. Doing 3 in one podcast is quite remarkable. So Dave, this one's yours. You've got initiative 2 as well. You've not quite reached Richard's scaled heights of 26 units. You've got 25, but you've also gone for that brilliant competent ordnance structure with a dozen in with the brilliant commander, and then a 6 and a 7. But there's a very, very different structure to this, a very, very different mix. So talk us through your commands. I don't know, maybe starting with the 12, whereas Richard had a load of heavy foot, a load of bowmen, and some extra cavalry to support it. Talk us through your 12 under your brilliant commander.
Okay, well, I think like Richard, we've both gone for size, knowing we're fighting Byzantine army. And the Byzantine army is only going to be sort of 20 strong, maybe 22 at max. So numbers are going to be a compelling event in this game, to use something I've been using all week. My difference here is that I've been a little bit more circumspect about my flanks than Richard. I've gone for slightly less impetuous cavalry. I've only gone for, I think it's 8 rather than Richard's 11. But what I've done is I put the commands, the pips into a command of a 12, where I've got 4 heavy cavalry impetuous, which is going to work with command 1, which is all heavy cavalry impetuous. And what I want to do is be able to throw out from that center command. I'm going to let the impetuous cavalry do their thing, but the command control from the center command is going to be working with some horse archers to try and spin out, operate with the bowmen in Richard's similar Palmarin manner, which I've learned from him. But I've got a few less bowmen. But what I want to do is my two medium horse archer bow and my 2 light horse archer bow and the 2 bowmen will operate together to try and hold one wing down whilst the cavalry probably goes down the centre of the table. Okay. And then I'm hoping, I'll have some sort of piece of terrain to pin, to put my, hopefully if I can get a coast in, something like that, or a piece of very difficult terrain to operate the spearmen from. I've given the spearmen a couple of bowmen to try and help.
Yeah, so the spearmen are in a separate command for you. They're in a command of 5 spearmen with a couple of screening Siloi and a competent general. But they're not supported by anything else. They just sit there, anchored against terrain, I guess, or ideally a flank.
Yeah, that's one option. The other option is I'm thinking that the Nikeforian army has got to have compulsory scutatoi, at least 3, and I'm thinking there's going to be a heavy spear fight somewhere in the game, so they may well go down the centre of the table. And what I'm hoping is the competent general they've got will give them enough hips to help from the shooting, and I've got 2 light infantry there to help them try and get that. So they can go down the centre of the table, and what I'm thinking is there, and maybe you might, from the centre command, from the brilliant command, if you've got the pips, you might spin the bow arm cavalry out to one side of them. What I want to concentrate the impetuous heavy cavalry, as Richard would say, and put.
Yeah. So your big command then, the 12, whereas Richard's was spearmen supported by bowmen. Which was too wide to manoeuvre in one block, the opportunity to spin the bowmen off, and then a sort of very much supporting medium cavalry plus light cavalry sort of tiny unit. You've got 4 impetuous, a mix of mediums and heavies. So you've got a punch with that, with the 4 cavalry. But then your medium cavalry, light cavalry bow block is actually 2 and 2. So that's a proper little command there, isn't it? And supported by the bowmen, it actually becomes quite intimidating for anything short of proper cavalry, that it comes about. That will bully something on a flank very, very well, and push something down. So you're using that in a different way, and then all your spearmen are together, and then your ordinary included general sits there with all 4 impetuous elite in one go. That's not messing about. And then
I want to say that's the troops that are going to do the fighting there. If you've got those, if you're going to have elites, have them as the heavy cavalry, and they're the ones that are going to do the fighting, we hope.
And then you're supporting those. The textbook way is probably the 4 elite impetuous heavy cavalry and 1 light horse or 2 light horse, but you're supporting them with 2 medium cavalry bow. What is that thinking? They're just better versions of light horse, and they can bully light horse. Are you thinking they go on the line, or? No,
I'm thinking they can either give it. I'm trying to get some flexibility, so the spear can go down one flank if necessary, or they can go down the centre. And both my impetuous heavy cavalry, if the impetuous heavy cavalry have to split onto 2 wings, they've both got some protection on the outside from Byzantine cavalry manoeuvring around. So there may be some sacrifices there. And then also you can plug a gap with the medium cavalry if necessary, and also they can evade if they get into trouble. I think, those medium cavalry may linger behind. If those nobles are going down one flank, they may linger behind as support, or they may be used to. I want to protect the wings of the impetuous.
Yeah. And then they're not going to be driven off. They can choose to stand and fight and die a bit more slowly, whereas light horse will just evaporate, I guess, is the theory. So, Richard, what are your thoughts on looking at this? It looks like a more controllable version of yours, but still doing similar-ish sort of things.
I think I like it, actually. I like that idea of putting the medium cavalry with the heavy cavalry, because you might also be able to advance them. I might have been tempted to give that the competent general and give the spearmen the ordinary, because I think the spearmen are going to mainly stand together and will rarely get the opportunity to move more than one pip forward.
No,
the one that worries
that was my thought as well, very much so. But
I think that's highly valid. I think it's a toss-up between the two.
Yeah.
I'm just purely thinking I want to try and make these in this, I've built two lists to fight an actual specific historical battle, which is where the Bulgar, Basil the Bulgar Slayer fought the Bulgarians and ended up massacring 10 to 15,000 Bulgarians, and, blinding them all in except 1 in 100 to lead them home. Allegedly, this is why he got his name, the Bulgar Slayer. So I'm trying to fight that battle. And what I was trying to do there with the competent general was to try and make the heavy spear as bulletproof as possible from the scutartoy and things like that.
Right, to give them more chance to rally. Well, that's valid. But the one that worries me a little bit is the large command, only because I think the medium light and footbow group is powerful. I just worry that with 4 impetuous cavalry, you may very easily end up in 4 movement groups.
Yes.
And if that's the time when you roll a 1, there's quite a lot of troops that are sort of middle-ranking troops rather than first-class troops. And so that's the only. If they were impact cavalry, I wouldn't have any concerns. But that would be my only quibble with the army. Really, are you asking that guy to do a little too much?
Yeah, I think there's that bit that we talked about with yours, Richard. If you're getting impetuous cavalry, they're going to act like impetuous cavalry, and in that case, having 5 of them and accepting that one of them is going to trip up and stumble before they do anything is probably better than having 4 of them, because something's going to go wrong. So I do love that 2 medium cavalry bow, 2 light cavalry bow block. That's very solid.
Yes.
But if what else do you do? Do you take out the light foot bow and put in an extra medium cavalry impetuous maybe to make that block up to 5? Because I'm not sure the light foot bow are doing too much in that. I'm trying to put.
I mean, I'm thinking those light foot bow can, if there is going to be a firefight, an archery fight, the light foot bow
gives you the extra plus in shooting. Yeah.
So the pluses here or there, and if you have got the pips, and if you're going to have an impetuous cavalry fight, you can try and take some of the shooting off with the light foot bow, working with the medium cavalry impetuous. They may reduce one go of shooting. If it's a straightforward down the middle game, I think I'm trying to give myself some more options. I think.
Yeah. No. Okay. I think that's it. It's an interesting one, for sure. Okay. All right. Well, let's move on and look at the third one. Third Bulgar list here. Then this one's mine. I've slightly kind of bent the rules a little. This one is one with a Pecheneg ally, and this one's slightly earlier than the Nikeforians. I think it's 40-50 years too soon, but I thought in terms of looking at different ways of trying to pull this list together, the Pechenegs give you a very, very different, unusual way of playing it, which is kind of fun, and a lot of what we're trying to do here is look at some different ways of doing it. So what I've gone for here, 25, same as yours, Dave, just short of yours, Richard, including a fortified camp, because this is much more a sort of slightly leave half the table empty sort of game, and on the basis that the Byzantines, anything that gets to my camp is going to be mounted. So a fortified camp pretty much nixes that falling over. But what I've done, probably the interesting bit, is to start with the Pechenegs. You have to call him Emperor Jake, really, don't you, for Jake the Pecheneg? And then again, I'm not sure Rolf Harris jokes are really appropriate anymore. But this just allows you to fit in that kind of refuse a flank thing of a couple of war wagons, just to plonk down and ignore a third of the table. And even if it does just force the Byzantines to spend pips on redeploying, it just gives you more of a chance of rushing them with the rest of the army. But again, with the Pechenegs, they still come with an included general as well as those 2 war wagons, there's an elite heavy cavalry bow with an included general who's ordinary. So if he dies, it's not that much of an extra points loss. And 3 light horse archers, which I think, Richard, this was a trick I might have picked up from you in one of your previous lists about if the Byzantines just drive away and ignore the flank that you're refusing and defending your own flank with the 2 war wagons, 3 horse archers and a heavy cavalry bow general can actually march around and cause some problems and pull some troops back that way, because you can't ignore it. You know, if it was 1 or 2, maybe you could, but 3 is starting to be a decent number. It's getting overlaps. It's doing decent amounts of shooting between the 3. So you've got 2 commands, really, the stationary war wagons defending your flank, and then this heavy cavalry thing that use almost no pips, cost almost no command, but then it just forces the enemy to do something. And then you're looking at the 18 units in the other part of the Bulgar army. So what I've looked at here is that sort of a mini version of, again, yours, Richard, in the first command, 4 spearmen and 2 archers as these are facing up, and I'm either pushing off cavalry with that, or I'm thinking that they can go into the Scutato if they're lucky there. I've kind of probably undercooked it maybe a smidge with just 1 skirmishing light infantry bow to screen the spearmen, but there are only 4 of them. And then 2 heavy cavalry impetuous and a light cavalry bow they're driving their impetuous elite. 2 elite is still pretty decent. That will, if this sits on 1 wing on the edge of the table, that will drive off or take down, supported by the archers and the spearmen. That's still enough to force its way down a flank, I think. Otherwise, though, it sits in the middle and works with the other command, which is 5 impetuous cavalry, 2 elite heavies, 3 mediums. So effectively, I'm fielding 7 impetuous cavalry in a block, more than likely 5 from this command and 2 from the command with the spearmen, that will be driven by a competent general and a brilliant general, giving them quite a lot of points. And then a kind of slightly bigger than Richard's, slightly smaller than Dave's, 2 light horse and 1 medium cavalry bowman as the second maneuver function group from that, which what that does, because I've got 3 horse archers, 4, 5 and 1 in the other one, gets me up to 6 light horse, which boosts the initiative up to 3, which I think gives a fighting chance of taking on the really high initiative Byzantines and contesting to see who wins the initiative. And the difference between 3 and 2 is it's 1 in the dice roll, but that's quite material. So it's doing sort of the same things, but on a narrower frontage, and using the Pechenegs to create that narrower frontage through the use of the war wagons, which hopefully would wrong foot the Byzantines and allow those 7 cavalry impetuous, 4 of which are elite and heavy, to punch through, supported by a number of the medium cavalry and light cavalry bow, whilst the infantry just kind of grind forward and hold on to it. So with the building blocks of this army and knowing you're fighting Byzantines, there is a thread of similarity running through all of these, but this is using the command and control in a different way, but holding back almost in, there's a couple of groups here, 1 medium cavalry bow, 2 light cavalry in the competent general's command, the Pecheneg cavalry. There's enough stuff here that meaningful little groups can spin out and pull the Byzantines wide, and the Byzantines can't ignore them and just concentrate on the other bits of the army. So that's kind of my theory with this one. Also, I've got some war wagons that are kind of nice, and I always do like to use them as well. So I don't know, what do you guys think? Richard, your list was first up. What's your thoughts on this one?
I think using a slightly unfamiliar ally is always a good ploy, because it immediately tends to throw the opponent off balance, because you've introduced an element they're not expecting. And the theory of how you're planning to use it, I thought sounded very sound. So I don't have any issues with it at all, really. I think the only thing is whether or not there's enough impetuous strength to, you could very easily be facing 8 tagmatic cavalry. And if they've shot you up a bit first, do you have enough impetuous cavalry to counteract that? Would be my only worry for. But other than that, and that would just depend on the day.
Yeah, no, and I think that's it. When I was putting together the list, it was one of the things I was really toying with is the difference between a 6-point light cavalry bowman, of which I've got 6, and a 7-point medium cavalry impetuous is wafer thin, and this ends up as a 199-point army anyway. So there are 6 light horse there. I think you could always swap if you wanted to change the mix a little. You could always swap in 1 or 2 of those light horse up bow to give you not 7 but 8 or 9 charging cavalry, which suddenly starts to make quite a difference.
Yes.
But it was just thinking of this as something that whether the Pechenegs allow you to fight on such a narrow frontage, but then have a threat in the area of the board that you've left behind as well, to give it just that sort of steppy feel without it just becoming I'm going to throw a load of impetuous cavalry at you and hope that they deal with whatever they're coming at. So there's this is almost about giving yourself the opportunity to play with it a bit more. Maybe there's a degree of that in it. I don't know, Dave, what's your thoughts on this one?
I really like it. I think I agree with Richard. I think it lacks a bit of oomph in the impetuous department. I would worry about Command 2 having 3 medium cavalry impetuous. I know you've got 2 light cavalry to screen them as they come forward. I would probably lose 1 unit in the army somewhere to try and upgrade those medium cavalry to heavy cavalry maybe, and that gives you a bit more strength. The thing I really do like about this army is the Pecheneg ally. I think there's some really interesting ways to play with that. I think war wagons, and particularly war wagon bow, is a troop type that people have almost overlooked until recent, the last year maybe, they've started to appear. A war wagon bow against cavalry, it's almost bulletproof for a start by its very nature, and 2 of them can just spin across as like a mobile, and yet they also, so cavalry have got to turn and go away from them in all extensions, and because they kick out the shooting at 4 UDs, they are a really heavy, really good troop type. I think the other thing that I find interesting about the Pecheneg ally is if you were to put down commands 1 and 2, i.e. the Bulgar cavalry, and put down Pecheneg ally last, you could put down the noble and the 3 horse archers into an ambush and just have 2 war wagons appear on the table. And yet, if you've got a plantation or something like that, you can then... So what I would probably do is swap the competent commander from Command 2 to the Pecheneg, and that gives them a certain amount of ability to operate separately. There's almost, the war wagons just do what they do. 1 pip, go forward, try and shoot at cavalry, and then you've got more pips to operate the Pecheneg noble and horse archers as almost a separate command.
Or possibly there's even an argument to make all 3 of the generals competent, because the first command, it would be a bit of a risk with heavy spearmen and bowmen and 2 impetuous cavalry, but I think, as we've said, once the spearmen start getting pinned down or grinding forward, they are only using 1 pip a turn, so you'd still have all your other pips to throw those 2 impetuous heavy cavalry in with the other ones. And if you're sacrificing on the initiative, you do suddenly have a lot of other options to give yourself more heavy cavalry or more medium cavalry impetuous and change that punch on it. But it's just, the eye gets drawn to those Pechenegs and what they do for your tactical options with that kind of really interesting war wagon bow thing, and the ability it gives you to refuse a flank, particularly against a predominantly mounted manoeuvring army like the Nikeforians. So I think on that moment, that's probably the time to move on and start looking at the much anticipated Nikeforians.
This means war.
So look, we're into the Nikeforian stage of the day and of the podcast. The famous Swiss Army knife toolkit of Nikeforian Byzantine. So Richard, let's dive straight into it with your list. And just scanning through it, I'm seeing all the famous names there: elite cavalry, heavy cavalry impact bow, the cataphracts are there, the Varangians in. It's all good stuff. You've got initiative 2, 22 units, which is probably more than some of these Nikeforian lists manage quite often, in a 4, a 10, and an 8 with competent, ordinary, and competent. So run us through those. How do they work? What are they going to do, and how are they going to take on the Bulgars?
So this is a list that is designed to take on the Bulgars or something like it. So if we start with what would, unless the terrain is very surprising, be in the center, which is the second command, which has 2 elite cataphracts, 4 Varangians, which I've taken as the 2-handed weapons, and then screened by 2 light infantry bow, 2 light infantry javelin, with an ordinary, unreliable general. So that's taking some chances, but by putting it in the middle, I'm hoping that it'll be hard for the Bulgars not to activate it at some point. That command is principally designed that it hopes to be opposite the Bulgar spearmen, hence the 2-handed weapons. But if they are against impetuous cavalry, the cataphracts will just make the Bulgars, make it harder for them just to roll over the 2-handed axemen. Enough light infantry that if there is a bit of terrain that they can run up alongside of, they can perhaps join in as overlaps from the terrain. Then the first command is an included competent general with 1 who would be in with the elite heavy cavalry impact bow, 2 other heavy cavalry impact bow, and a light cavalry bow.
That's so very textbook, isn't it? 3 of those heavy cavalry, really punchy. The 1 elite in the middle and the light cavalry bow. But it can drive off a lot of people with shooting.
It can drive off. It can ambush. It can flank march. And then, but it can also evade if needs be to pull a whole bunch of impetuous cavalry forward so that the cataphracts could hit them in the flank. Yeah. On the other wing, you've got 2 of the tagmatic heavy cavalry impact bow, 2 light cavalry bow, and 4 of the mixed heavy spear bow. The idea being there that again, depends a bit on the terrain, but normally the mixed spear would be marching alongside either the cataphracts or the Varangian axemen, and would hope to be able to get into a position to either shoot up the enemy spear while the Varangians wheeled onto them, or be shooting up the impetuous horse, allowing some tactical charges by the tagmatic cavalry. And they've got a competent general. So fairly simple. The worrying thing about it is it's only 22. It's quite tough. It's sort of reasonable command and control, but I've only got 2 points of command. It could easily come unstuck because, some bad command rolls. It is kind of relying on that. Although the cataphracts, Varangians, and Scutato give you 10 units, which will just kind of stand there and can absorb quite a lot of punishment.
Yeah. Dave, what's your thoughts on this one?
It's a very, very unusual way of playing the Byzantines.
My thoughts that as well. Yeah.
It's going to be a bit of surprise to people finding, where's all the tagmatic heavy cavalry, bow, elites, chargy cavalry? I think this is a very flexible army list, as we know, as we've been discussing earlier. It's got all the toys in different ways. I think going with a lot of spear is a good way of dealing with I think, yes, if you're expecting the Bulgars to have the spear, you're outmatching their spear. Brilliant, very clever. And you've also got the Scutatoi in a mass, which are going to outshoot any horse archers in particular. My one concern would be the Scutatoi being charged down by impetuous heavy cavalry. I think we all sit there and go, you're fighting a minus, but you tend to throw in your impetuous heavy cavalry or your impact heavy cavalry into a massive spearman at some point.
Yeah. Although I think, to be fair though, 4 is one of those magic numbers with archery troops that once you get up to 4, you are putting out enough shooting that you're going to damage anything that's coming towards you. 2, you can be unlucky. 3, you're there, but 4, whatever's hitting you is damaged.
Particularly since next to them are 2 shooting in tagmatic cavalry.
Yeah,
and maybe 2 light horse bow as well. So you've actually got a frontage of 8 shooters.
Very good.
Were you tempted to? Because again, I'm trying to think back to one of your other lists, your 100 Years' War list that had a lot more spearmen than and ducked out on the 2-handed cutting weapon men. Were you tempted to mix the Varangians with spear and 2-handed cutters, or because then that gives them, as a block, more resilience? Even I always sort of feel that even 1 spear makes them feel much harder for cavalry to charge down, but maybe that's just psychological.
No, I mean it's tempting, but that's why I said this is, if I was doing it as a more open list, I would probably do that. But all I'm facing with the Bulgars is heavy spearmen, in which case I want the axemen, or the best they can throw at me is elite armored impetuous cavalry. Well, at contact we're 1-1, and after contact, so the odds are 21 out of 36 that I survive. Bit less maybe if they're elite, but so greater than 50% chance of surviving, and thereafter I'm up, and they're probably going to break off at some point. Meanwhile, I think the rest of my army is doing quite a lot of harm to them. So in this situation, no, but more generally, yes.
Yeah, maybe I'm just getting over obsessed with that game me and Dave played, where my my English knights, or no, German allied knights, ran over your dismounted Frenchmen in pretty short order. Maybe I'm being unfair on that one. No, but it is very interesting to see a Byzantine army without thousands of tagmatic cavalry filling the table. So you've got, as you
5.
I think there's another really good thing is Richard's managed to get a Byzantine army up to 22.
Yeah,
which is a feat just in itself. And funnily enough, having those cheaper Russian 2-handed weapons guys means you bulk out the army. Strangely enough.
Yeah, and you've got frontage of 15 combat troops. You've got 5 tagmatic, 4 Varangians, 2 cataphracts, 4 scutatoi. So you're filling half the table with stuff that is problematic for the Bulgars. Very much so. And it's going to be wider than your own 11 charging cavalry, isn't it? Really, that's the thing. I guess it's all on the matchup. Okay, well, let's have a look at the next one.
This means war.
So the second Nikeforian list, and Dave, this is yours, and wonderful. You've got the textbook Nikeforian Initiative of 4. Congratulations. We're back to normal services resumed here, aren't we? And 20 units. So I feel on much more comfortable ground here with this one. Basil, the strategist in the lead. You've got an 11, a 4, and a 4. So you're going ambush crazy, I imagine. So talk us through your Initiative 4, with a fortified camp, 20 unit Byzantine list. Run us down it from Basil the strategist. What's he got and what's he doing?
Okay, so with the scutatoi, I tend to almost treat them as bowmen. It should be spearmen instead of swordsmen. That's a mistake.
Yeah.
What I want to do is I've given Basil, made him strategist, because I want to use him to. Funnily enough, I think what's going to happen is the strategist is going to be manoeuvring my scutatoi around the table, possibly in 2 groups of 2, to support my cavalry shooting. Because they're foot bowmen, they get a +1 against mounted. And then if you add in another cavalry shooting or a light foot shooting with them, they're going to drag down any cavalry facing them. I want to use them as an anti-cavalry command. If they do have to sit together, as a block. As you mentioned in the last part of the podcast, I've added a Varangian spearman into that group to give it a bit more stiffening.
You picked that up really quickly, Dave. I'm really impressed. It was only minutes ago that we were talking that. That's good.
The other thing was that is if they do have to fight as an infantry block, I would put the cataphracts with them to stiffen them up again. Hopefully the cataphracts will then penetrate through whilst the scutatoi die slowly. That will sort of give me some advantages there. So I'm trying to give myself options. I can have it as an infantry block supported with the cataphracts to give them some points. I did toy with trying to find some points elsewhere by maybe losing one of the scutatoi and making the Varangian two-handed weapons and things like that. But then I thought, no, I want them to be shooting. This is a shooting army. It's got to do its damage with shooting before it charges home, so to speak. Then you've got two wings of tagmatic heavy cavalry, essentially. I've tried to get as many elite tagmatic cavalry into the army.
Yeah, for a four strong command, having 3 elite heavy cavalry impact bow and a light cavalry bow that's pretty full fat, isn't it? You're committed with that one. That's doing everything it can. And
they've got competent generals. That should give them enough pips to move quickly if they need to. Doing the classic thing with the Byzantine army of going, right, here's a 4-piece group. And if you sort of mount up, if the Bulgarians mount up all their own impetuous cavalry against that, they turn and scoot, as I said in the blurb at the start, they scoot behind the scutatoi and round the other side of the table to join their other group of 4 and give themselves an overwhelming, if you can get all the tagmatic cavalry into one block with enough pips to mean that they can split up, pin something while another one splits around the side. And that's why there's a medium cavalry bow in 4, just to sort of try and save some money to get myself to 20 units in the army, which is a difficulty in itself. But he's, hopefully going to run off somewhere and cause some trouble, or just go forward in his own and pin people in the centre of the table. If you meet in Command 4, you've got a medium cavalry bow and a light cavalry blow. And I think this is what we did in the game we put on YouTube. I put them down the centre of the table as an offering whilst getting my tagmatic people into angles. If you create angles against impetuous troops, then you can split them up and get the advantage with your command and control.
Yeah, because my they were Gepids at the time. I think we're chasing your Byzantine cavalry all over the table and got very much broken up. And I think that's an interesting concept, actually, to say this is an army. You've got 2 blocks of 4 cavalry, or 3 cavalry and a light horse, that sit on the flanks at deployment, either side of your solid 4 scutatoi, 1 Varangian, 2 cataphract, your 7 wide solid sort of pseudo foot block. But you're not planning to leave them operating on either flank. You're seeing where the enemy is, and you're instantly redeploying one of those 2 flanks round the back and over to the other side to give you 100% overwhelming numbers on one side, and to let time and space and table soak up a third of the enemy army in a lot of ways, which
that's precisely it. And one other thing I'd also say is, I don't know, it's strange to have the strategists with the infantry, is I would look for an opportunity to split up the scutatoi and maybe get just 2 of them moving with the cavalry commands in support to give them just that extra bit of shooting against the troops they're facing.
Yeah, no, that's a really unusual way of doing it. But yeah, I think that manoeuvring the blocks of 4 behind is a very Byzantine thing, but it's possible given the size of the army. Richard, what's your thoughts on this one?
I think it would be a lot of fun to play because of the command points and the maneuverability, and you're going to have to do a lot of thinking. But because of its size, really, it's you take away the light horse and the light infantry, and you've got 14 troops, I think, in the line of battle. Most of which, pretty much all of which, shoot. So that's always a good thing. But, compared to some of those Bulgar armies we were talking about, where you've maybe got pushing 20 line of battle troops, but individually, most of them are weaker. So it, as Dave and you were describing, it's going to be all about delaying and bringing the critical high quality troops to, what is it, Clausewitz calls it, the Schwerpunkt, the critical point, and influencing the battle there. And then this army will win. But if the enemy can frustrate that plan, it's small enough that if it starts to lose, it will lose quite quickly, because it doesn't have a lot of people to take up the damage.
Yeah, I can see it sort of. You're right. It would play. It's almost got the same components as yours, but it would play very differently, because this is one that is almost deployment agnostic.
Yes.
Whereas yours, if you get the deployment right against the Bulgars, you're in a great place. If you get it wrong, or the Bulgars wrong foot you, it's a bit harder for you to sort that out. Whereas
Absolutely.
this one is saying, I'm kind of going to deploy after I've deployed. I'm going to deploy in the first turn and just sort it out. It's a very, very different way of playing with the army. Kind of interesting. I'm just looking at it to think, having those fours, I guess they can all ambush. You've got a strategist that gives you more ambush markers as well. And then you went for the fortified camp, Dave. Is that a thing because the army is so small?
It's actually, in a Byzantine army, it's nice to get something which is 6 points.
Right. It's just cheap. Yeah, no, I guess that's right.
There was some method to the madness, because I was thinking, okay, you could take another light foot or something, light horse, but an extra light horse is not going to give you anything more. I can't seem to remember. Yeah, it doesn't give you anything more in initiative. But I thought, if you're fighting against an army of 26, and if they do get around the flanks and go for your camp, at least the camp has got some sort of ability to withstand you losing 4 points of your army.
But I take it back then, that means you've actually only got 13 in your line of battle.
Well,
and that really...
yeah, you've got to get that in the right place, haven't you?
You've really got to dance.
Yeah, you've got to dance a lot on that one.
Yeah, it'd be great fun to play, because you've got the command points to dance. If you like a dancing army, this is the one for you.
Yeah. Are you defending with this, Dave?
I would tend to think that I might fight in the mountains wherever possible, because in the strategist command, I've also got 4 light foots, including 2 light foot javelins. So if there's if I can anchor my army and that command on a piece of difficult terrain with the light foot in the terrain, then it's fairly solid there. And then you can then put, if you've got a piece of difficult terrain, you can then put the bow, the scutato in a group with a varangian on the inside of that, and then the cataphract can then possibly start to work with the cavalry in a much more.
Yeah, I think it is a sort of one of those slightly counterintuitive, or it feels counterintuitive until you think it through, things that throwing down a number of small bits of difficult terrain for a mounted redeploying army like this actually sometimes makes it better, because an unwieldy army finds it difficult to redeploy round and past difficult terrain. It just takes ages. Exactly. Whereas this one, little fours can just run into gaps and use time and space and terrain just to buy itself, 2, 3, 4 moves without somebody's other force getting round to the flank at all.
And
really.
I'm hopefully avoiding having the classical situation of having the weakness of the Nikeforian Byzantine army is it's got very little good medium infantry at all. And, if you're fighting in mountains, you're then depriving... the one thing you don't want with a cavalry shooting army is to have a hill in the middle of the table full of bowmen, which you can't do anything about. What I call a bowman roundabout in the centre of the table of a gentle hill with a field on top of it, which you cannot shift anything out of. That's your nightmare.
Yeah, that's your problem, isn't it? Okay. Well, look, an interesting one. Well, let's move on and look at the third one.
This means war.
Look, we're into the final lap here, the final Nikeforian Byzantine army, and this one's mine. This one again is kind of with a big nod to fighting a Bulgar army as well, something sort of mounted and steppy, which is different to how you might put it forward for a different sort of competition. So I've got the 20 as well. Couldn't quite eke it into that 21. because of all those, the high cost points value troops and what I'm trying to do with the army, I've not gone too big on the generals. I've just gone straight down the list with 3 competent generals, which only gives me an initiative of 2. But whereas I think yours, Dave, was an army of redeployment and maneuver, and Richard, yours was kind of an army of having that sort of center that breaks apart. This one is a bit more geared towards fighting reasonably on a pretty wide frontage, and even though it's only 20, so there's very, very few support troops in this. That's part of where the initiative sort of comes in. So what I've got here in 3 roughly even, or much more even commands than some of the other ones. The CNC's command, or nominally the CNC's command, is the biggest at 8. So I've gone 3 of the heavy cavalry impact bow tagmatics, all elite, because I think 3 is just, it's a punchy number. 2 always kind of gets overlap, but 3, you're causing a lot of trouble for someone. And then I boosted that up with another 2 ordinary ones. So, and then with the light cavalry bow to give them width. So you've got a 6 wide block of heavy cavalry impact bow, half of them elite. 5 of them are the heavy cavalry impact bow, 3 of them are elite. I think that is very, very punchy. And then also with it, a couple of Scutatoi that sort of fits both. It does both things that those troops do. It's either 2 spearmen, okay, they're mediocre in combat, that makes that 5 tagmatic cavalry 7 wide, which should be bigger than anybody else's charging mounted thing. And they're putting out the bow fire. So it is that mobile terrain block, pumping out bow fire. You're putting 7-8 pieces of shooting out of the frontage of that unit. The next one, I only went with the 1 cataphractoi. They're such a tempting unit. I'm still not sure whether I should have gone for any at all. 2 more Scutatoi who are going to do sort of the same thing. They could end up working on either flank, supporting all of the other mounted, or they could end up sat in a kind of sort of slightly lightweight version of, I think, Richard, your sort of center there. So my center is 1 cataphractoi, 2 Scutatoi, and 2 Russ Varangians, who I've taken as spearmen, with very much with the I'm fighting mounted thing here. I want to be trying to engage the enemy's mounted and avoiding possibly their block of spearmen here, and pushing out to the wings, which I think this army can do to an extent, and a couple of light infantry to screen them. I think some of them are compulsory anyway. So this is really a 4 wide block of spear people that kicks out some shooting with a cataphract as well. And if I do come up against that big block of Bulgar spearmen, I'm just trying to drift away from it and possibly leave the cataphractoi and the Russ spearmen to play with it if I have to, but I don't really want to play with it. I want to engage their mounted. And then I've kind of gone with if you think you're going to be fighting impetuous mounted or impact mounted cavalry, the easy answer is to try and match them with more, really. So I've taken a Georgian ally, which gives me 3 heavy cavalry impetuous elite nobles. So you add that to the ones in the first command, there's 6 impact or impetuous heavy cavalry elite in this army. There's the 2 tagmatics as well, and then another heavy cavalry impetuous in the Georgians to make them up to 4, and then that kind of mandatory light cavalry bow for support. So I'm sort of, if we look at the armies we had, they had, I think Richard, yours was the most with 11. I think Dave, you might have had 7 charging cavalry. This army can put 5, 6, 7, 8. This can put 9 down itself against them, and support that with 2 blocks of Scutatoi and a couple of spearmen as well. So this is sort of I will take your impetuous charging cavalry army, and I'll raise you with the Scutatoi being able to support it a bit more, but I will face you off and just engage you quickly when maybe your Bulgar army is possibly expecting that more, that challenge your army gives it, Dave, of the Byzantines squirting out the way. This is like, yeah, I'll take you on with what you've got, and and I've got 6 elite and the cataphract and the scutatoi, and suddenly what you think is your strike point is something that I'm absolutely happy to take on really quickly before you've realized that I'm doing that, and see if I can kind of beat it through quality. It's a bit of a getting to the bar early version of the Nikeforians. I think I'd be getting the round in and bringing it to your table, Dave, for sure, and possibly yours as well, Richard, if we were placing this in a competition. But I don't know. What do you guys think of it, Richard? What's your thoughts? Your list was first up.
So I think, again, it's like all of the lists are playable. I think against some of the lists we've been looking at, the only slight challenge with it possibly is the Georgian ally, in that some of the other ones that it would be facing would be perhaps having 5 or 6 impetuous cavalry to its 4. Equally, if it was facing spear and bow, it might sort of end up
it'd have a very bad
falling in front of the spear and getting shot up. But the rest of it is so strong, it's a Byzantine army, so the allies are totally expendable. I think if you view it as the job of the Georgians is to charge and die slowly, while your 5 tagmatic cavalry really punish whatever they're against, and your core 2 stays in being and provides a threat and hopes to achieve some shooting. It's certainly an army I would hate to face. With either of mine. I can see it being a handful.
Okay, Dave, what are your thoughts?
I like this Scutatoi in 2 separate penny packets, so to speak, a bit like Sherman tanks. They just move around their own. And I like the way that in Group 1, in Command 1, that you've got Scutatoi, you can support the cavalry, so I think you'd use your pips to get the Scutatoi moving forward across the table. And if anybody comes towards them to try and take them on, then you support them with your your much better heavy cavalry. That would be my plan there. The only criticism I'd probably take the competent general out of the Georgian command and put him into Command 1, possibly. I'd make him a brilliant general, so then you can really use the pips.
Yeah, I must admit, I'm looking at it here on screen myself and thinking, do you make that second command, the one in charge of the infantry, do you make him unreliable, or do you make do you make him brilliant, and do you make the competent commander in Command 1 into someone who's included? Possibly not. He's got to still move the Scutato, but I think there's definitely an argument for putting a brilliant commander in there somewhere and making one of the other 2 included or unreliable. I'm not sure you can put him in with the those infantry, but I think possibly competent included in the first one, and make the second one brilliant, so you can drive their Scutatoi around a bit more separately to the spearmen and the cataphract. But yeah, there's a little bit of fiddling with command and control possibly that could be done.
Brilliant into Command 1, and then you've got so many pips to definitely move your Scutatoi up on their own.
Actually, that is a good point. Yeah, you're right. I think when we started with the Bulgars, we had that discussion about. I think I started the discussion about don't over-egg the commands with a fully impetuous cavalry command. You are just going to get them stuck in. So perhaps, Dave, I think I could see you're right. Go down to ordinary with the Georgian and make the first command brilliant, so that he's able to move those fast-moving cavalry and keep the Scutatoi with them. That might be a better way of doing it. Quite possibly.
You've got when your army breaks on 20 and your Georgian ally, one of those, if that general dies, then there's 4 points of your 20 have just gone. It's I don't know, just one thought.
Yeah, true. Yeah. No, I think that's quite a good call.
Yeah. And I can see playing it though, actually being a little tentative with the Georgians in the first few turns, in that what you don't want is them herring off too early. You are going to commit them, but if they're outmatched, they're going to want to not come forward until everything else is until your infantry are well advanced, and then they're going to want to come up hard. I think if you bring them forward early, they've got more chance of being mobbed before the rest of the army's won for you.
100% agree.
Maybe it's even a case of taking the cataphractoi out and sticking in another spearman, and that buys you a load more points to upgrade some of the generals and command and control. Because I'm thinking, I don't know, there's different, it's nearly there, isn't it? There's a few little ways you could tweak it. And
the nice thing with the cataphractoi is, though, that if that foot command ends up against the Bulgar spearman, he makes a heck of a difference, because it means that the Bulgars are much more reluctant to attack you. Otherwise, they're just going to want to charge you.
Yeah, no, I guess so, actually. Yeah, he's kind of important there then. Okay, so but that's three pretty different ways of using and combining and deploying and fielding these Byzantine armies to match up against those Bulgar armies. So on that point, we will roll the music and then come back and talk about some of the figures.
This means war.
So that's 6 lists, 6. Obviously, they're different ways because it's 2 different lists, but 3 different ways of fighting the Bulgars and 3 different ways of fighting the Byzantines as well. How we always round these things off is having a look at how you collect these figures. Now, we started with the Bulgar lists. The Bulgars are not, I think it's fair to say, top of many 15mm manufacturers' lists of exclusive ranges or whatever, but when we started with the history chat, we're saying that they are a kind of an evolution of a whole set of different peoples who all came from steppe tribes and things like that. So if we look at it as steppe tribes then moving into kind of charging Balkan quasi East European cavalry, there's probably quite a lot of nice ranges for things like that. Are there troops that either of you guys have got in your armies that you go, I'm going to put these on table and say, yep, these are Bulgars, and no one's going to argue with them because they're just nice troops?
Interestingly, minifigs actually had a few.
Oh, right, okay.
Yep. They had a whole range of the old WRG Dark Ages sort of Asiatic cavalry with big baggy coats and sheepskin hats, and some were Avars, some were Pechenegs. I can't remember where anything was specifically Bulgar. So, but you could they had a lot of variety. They weren't, whereas some companies, Huns or whatever, all a bit similar. They had quite a lot of variety. So I've still got a few of those that I would happily put on the table as Bulgars. Yeah,
I guess possibly some of do Essex still have that Hunnic range that they used to have for years, or did they replace it in the end with all the slightly different guys with the sheepskin hats and the sheepskin waistcoats and axes and bows and things like that? Maybe that would have been
the Essex Huns are really good. There's a lot of variety. There's like one pack with bow, one pack with hand weapons, and one pack with javelins. But what Essex do, they actually just have a range they call Asiatic hordes, don't they?
Actually, that's true.
Want to make them completely mixed up, I think you can go too far with mixing the troops up. I think you can get a bit chaotic, but I think we are talking what is just Asiatic hordes. So they've got Slav medium cavalry, Avar extra heavy cavalry, blah blah blah. I think I'd probably go Essex and have a mixture of Huns and Asiatic hordes, and they've got Khazars and things like that, haven't they? And things like that.
That's true. Yeah, I think just looking also. Fighting 15s, their gladiator range, they've got an Asiatic nomads thing. But for the charging cavalry, would you does this kind of get into Goths and Gepids and Lombards? Would you use some of those, because that was some of their opponents as well, or would they be still these Asiatic types just using their weaponry differently?
I think they've got different armor. They're wearing scale armor. The helmet's slightly different. You're getting towards I don't know how to put it,
sort of almost quasi-Russian and Polish and things like that.
There's an argument to use some Russian figures in there. I think you could get away with that in the later period, in the later Nikeforian, the 11th century period. I'd definitely look at Russian ranges for cavalry and things like that. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Interesting. Well, let's
might be worth researching is just whether or not they'd shifted at all to kite shields away from round shields.
Good question.
I think you could probably use both, but I think that's, the Byzantines had shifted and the Bulgars tended to copy the Byzantines a lot.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, and then there's some Legio Heroica Armenian ranges that start getting into kite shields that maybe would fit as well. They're quite nice little figures as well. But yeah, that's probably worth doing a bit of digging around, see when the kite shield kind of moves in, because that suddenly gives you quite a distinctive late period charging thing. But if it does, that'd be great, because I could use my my Armenians. That'd be fantastic for some Bulgars. Very happy if they get another outing. Excellent. All right, let's do the Byzantines then. So there's a bit of music. Yeah. So we talked about the Bulgars a little bit. They're very generic, and you've got a lot of flexibility about picking the best figures or the coolest looking ones. Now, the Nikeforians, the contrast to that is a range that all sorts of manufacturers do. It's always been a popular army. There's a lot of troop types that are quite distinctive, from the Varangians to the Scutatoi and the rest of it. So, Dave, I think this is an army that you've very much collected and put a lot of work in. How have you approached it in terms of buying and figure manufacturing?
It was one of my first. I actually built a very large army for Fog, the Field of Glory, and so I used Khorasan figures from America. He makes some very, very nice actual Nikeforian Byzantine. The Nikeforian Byzantines are slightly different because they have a padded arm, felted armor over their chain mail to some degree. So I think what you'd find with a Nikeforian infantryman, he'd be wearing chain mail, a helmet or not. Sometimes they have a little turban around the helmet, but then they had these padded, I've forgotten the words for them, their armies, their armor's called Clivanian, because I use that word quite a bit. But they had a padded jersey over the top.
A bit like an Akaton.
That's the one, yeah. But the Khorasan figures are very nice. The only thing is they have spaghetti spears. So I ended up drilling through the bodies to stick.
Oh, no. Okay.
I made a lot of effort for them. And the cavalry are very, very nice in Khorasan.
Yeah. Okay. So you're saying that the Byzantines are actually notably different at this stage to any of the earlier periods of Byzantines then. So I'm just looking at some of the other companies who do them.
These three distinct periods. There's the early period where you're talking about the Justinian Byzantine and the Maurician Byzantine, where they look fairly Roman-like. Then you've got a period into the centre, the thematic period, where they're becoming much more Dark Ages, cavalry, and becoming influenced by the steppe opponents they're fighting and things like that. And they become a lot more steppe army looking. And then this, I think one of the great appeals of Nikeforian Byzantine is it's a very distinctive army, and you're starting to touch towards the medieval. And it's a great bit of fun, because you need an infantry base, you need those guards, cavalry, you need some other cavalry, and you also need to get some charging Norman cavalry into the army somewhere as well. And of course, you've got the all wonderful Varangian guardsmen, of course.
Yeah, because the other one who do a lot of Byzantines is always Museum, but they have their generic Byzantine range, and some of them kind of move into kite shields. But are they not quite with that sort of padded armor to really properly be Nikeforians?
I think they're a bit older in terms.
Yeah.
Forged in Battle have got a new Nikeforian range I've not really seen so much of, but they're quite good as well.
Yeah. And Richard, is this one that you've collected specifically for?
No, actually, it's one of the few I've been tempted, but never really got into. So I can't really add much to the conversation.
All right, okay. Because I think with my Nikeforians are very much my generic Byzantines wearing with a different hat. But I think about a couple of years ago, I went, because I had so many, those Byzantine cavalry, the lance bow shield cavalry, for earlier army lists where you had multiple units of 4. There were just so many of them. What I did is I took some of them, sort of trimmed off the shields and stuck on a load of kite shields, and actually then did the same with some old Essex cataphracts. I think they were actually the Essex Seleucid cataphract, with that kind of stripe of color down the back of the saddle. So what I did with those is added some kite shields to them, gave a bit of color to the armor. I think they were silver armor, and I gave them sort of a blue ink wash, which gave them a kind of a different thing, and gave them a load of little religious icons as standards. Because if you go online and search for Byzantine icons, you get gazillions of images. There's even obviously a big kind of contemporary market for modern artwork. So you actually get nice resolution images that you can shrink down and print out and use as kind of shields, or even as shields, or as little standards. So I've actually kind of regraded through giving them a more random mix of shields and things like that, and more kite shields, and particularly the cataphracts, to create some of those different Byzantine units, which has worked quite well. It means they're different figures to everybody else's. So there's a lot of options, but I think it's important, probably, that thing, the Nikeforians are where they start to move towards padded armor. So probably stretching it from those early Byzantines is perhaps a little bit much in terms of design, but it's a popular army. There's a lot of people making stuff for it, and there's plenty of options. So that's it for this podcast. Don't forget, you can follow up from this by going over to Madaxeman.com to check out both the ADLG wiki, where you'll find the lists we discussed this week, and also the figure directory and figure gallery, where you'll be able to find loads of pictures and information about the manufacturers and different ranges, so that you can compare before you buy. Thank you for listening to our podcast, and we'll see you on Madaxeman.com for another podcast soon.
This means war.